Homeless at 21, her sisters took everything, so she reopened Grandma's boarded-up soda fountain. What she found inside wasn't just a new life, but the truth that had been kept from her since she was a child. If you've ever felt like the world had counted you out, or that you were starting from less than zero, then I think this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because we're a community of people who know what it's like to rebuild from the rubble. The air in the lawyer's office was the color of weak tea and smelled of old paper and quiet desperation. It was a smell I'd grown used to over the years, the official sin of my life being decided by other people in rooms I wasn't welcome in. But this was supposed to be different. This was my 21st birthday, the day I was officially an adult, free from the system, the group homes, the constant supervision. The day I was supposed to get my inheritance. Mr. Gable, a man whose shoulders seemed permanently stooped from the weight of other people's bad news, slid a single, crisp envelope across the polished mahogany of his desk. It made a dry, whispery sound, like leaves skittering across pavement. "I'm sorry, Maya," he said, his voice as gray as his suit. He'd been my grandmother's lawyer, and now he was mine, though it felt more like he was the system's. He didn't meet my eyes. Lawyers like him never did. I stared at the envelope. It had my name on it, written in the spidery, elegant script of a woman I only vaguely remembered, my grandmother, Eleanor. "What is it?" I asked. My own voice sounded small, a stranger's voice in this big, quiet room. "It's what's left," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were full of a tired, practiced pity that made my skin crawl. "Your grandmother's estate was complicated. There were significant debts, medical bills from her final years. After your sisters, Melissa and Tara, settled everything, this is the remainder of your portion. I didn't need to open it. I could feel the thinness of it through the paper. It was a check, and it wasn't for much. Not enough to rent an apartment. Not enough to eat for more than a few months. Certainly not the fresh start I had been pinning every last one of my hopes on for the past 3 years. My sisters," I said, the words catching in my throat. They were the executors. They handled the sale of the house, the assets. He cleared his throat, a delicate little sound. They felt, given your situation, that a cash settlement would be the most practical solution for you, my situation. He meant the fact that I'd been a ward of the state since I was 16, bounced from one foster home to another after Grandma Eleanor got too sick to care for me and my sisters, already adults with their own lives, decided they couldn't handle a teenager. They had visited, of course. They brought gift card for my birthday and took carefully curated photos for their social media, the perfect image of caring older siblings. But when it came to the hard parts, the parent-teacher conferences, the late-night fears, the paperwork, they were ghosts. And now, they had liquidated my entire future into a single, insulting check. The rage was a hot, metallic taste in the back of my mouth. But I'd learned long ago that showing anger in rooms like this got you nowhere. It just got you labeled. Unstable. Difficult. So I swallowed it down, letting it settle into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. "I see," I said. It was a lie. I didn't see it all. I saw a betrayal so clean and efficient it must have been planned for years. "There is one other thing," Mr. Gable said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a small, tarnished brass key attached to a faded red plastic tag. The number 142 was stamped into the plastic. "This was left for you specifically. Your grandmother was very clear about it in her will. It wasn't to be considered part of the estate's assets." He placed it on the desk next to the envelope. It looked ancient, like something that belonged to a lock that had long since rusted away. "It's the key to her old business, the soda fountain on Main Street in Havenwood. The property itself was signed over to you in a separate trust when you were a child, untouchable by the estate's creditors. Or by anyone else, for that matter." I stared at the key. Havenwood. The name was a faint echo from a childhood I could barely piece together. A small town nestled in the mountains, a place we'd visited a few times when I was very young. I remembered the sweet, sticky smell of syrup and the whir of a milkshake machine. I remembered my grandmother's warm, flour-dusted hands. "The soda fountain," I whispered. "It's been closed for years. Boarded up since she fell ill," Mr. Gable said, his tone dismissive. "Honestly, Maya, The building is probably worthless. The town's been struggling. The property taxes are past due. There's an offer on the table from a development company looking to buy up that whole block. They demolish it. Your sisters are encouraging you to take the offer. It would be a significant amount. He named a number that made the air leave my lungs. A number that would solve everything. A number that would let me walk away and never look back. He slid a business card across the desk. That's the developer's agent. Your sisters have already spoken with him. He's just waiting for your signature. I looked from the business card to the key. One was a clean exit, a path to a life of anonymous stability. The other was a ghost, a boarded-up building in a dying town, a memory I couldn't quite grasp. My sisters wanted me to take the money. Of course they did. It was neat. It was tidy. It absolved them. They could send me the money, sever the last tie, and go back to their perfect lives the inconvenient younger sister finally dealt with. But Grandma Eleanor had left me the key. She had set it aside, protected it, made sure it came to me and only me. Why? I picked up the key. It was heavier than it looked, solid and real in my palm. The check in the envelope felt like paper, like nothing. But this key, this felt like something. Thank you, Mr. Gable, I said, my voice steady for the first time that day. I pocketed the key and stood up, leaving the developer's card and the envelope with the pathetic check sitting on his desk. Where are you going? He asked, a flicker of genuine surprise in his tired eyes. I'm going to Havenwood, I said. The bus ride to Havenwood was a slow, rattling journey from one world to another. The city bled away behind me, its sharp angles and concrete canyons softening into the rolling green hills and dense forests of the countryside. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the landscape shift and change. For 3 days, I had couch surfed with a friend from my last group home, a girl named Sarah who had her own precarious hold on the world. Her apartment was a tiny, fifth-floor walk-up that always smelled faintly of burnt toast and her roommate's cat. She was kind, but I could feel my presence straining her already thin resources. I had the few $100s I'd saved from my part-time job at a diner, a backpack with 3 changes of clothes, and the brass key. That was the sum total of my worldly possessions. The bus groaned as it climbed into the mountains, the engine a constant, laboring hum. With every mile, the knot of anger in my stomach began to loosen, replaced by something else. A hollow, aching curiosity. I tried to remember Havenwood, to pull a clear image from the murky depths of my childhood memories. I remembered the taste of cherry phosphates, the crinkle of my grandmother's apron, the low rumble of her laugh. But the memories were like old photographs, faded at the edges, the faces just out of focus. My sisters were never in them. They were already teenagers then, mortified by the idea of spending a weekend in a small town, helping an old woman sling ice cream. They had stayed behind in the city, even then, already separating themselves, already leaving me behind. Had they ever even liked her? Or was she just an obligation, a burden they were waiting to be free of? The thought was a bitter pill. The bus was mostly empty. An elderly woman with a cloud of white hair slept with her head against the window. A young man in a military uniform stared blankly at the seat in front of him. We were all running from something or to something, maybe both at the same time. I wonder what they would think if they knew my story. A 21-year-old girl, technically an adult, but feeling more like a lost child than ever before, heading to a derelict building in a forgotten town on the basis of a single, mysterious key. It sounded like the beginning of a bad movie. A little bit of dry humor, a small, internal chuckle bubbled up. It was absurd. My entire situation was absurd. Maybe that was the only way to look at it without completely falling apart. The air grew cooler as we gained elevation. Pine trees, tall and silent, lined the winding road. Occasionally, a gap in the trees would reveal a breathtaking view of the valley below, a patchwork of green and gold under the afternoon sun. It was beautiful and wild and felt a million miles away from the gray, unforgiving streets I had just left. It felt like a place where you could breathe, but also felt lonely, deeply, profoundly lonely. What was I even doing? I had no plan. I had no money. I was pinning my entire future on a feeling, a vague memory of a grandmother who had been, for all intents and purposes, a stranger for the last 5 years of her life. The developer's offer echoed in my mind. That money could buy me a real life. A small apartment, a community college course, a buffer against the constant, grinding anxiety of poverty. It was the sensible choice. The adult choice. My sisters would call it the smart choice. But it would mean bulldozing the last piece of my grandmother. The only thing she had left just for me. The bus slowed, its air brakes hissing, and pulled to a stop in front of a small, wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Havenwood." Population 842, the town square, was a postcard from a bygone era. A gazebo stood in the center of a small, well-tended park. The buildings that lined the square were old brick, their facades bearing the faded ghosts of painted advertisement from the 1950s. There was a hardware store, a bakery, a post office, and a handful of other small shops. Some were thriving, with cheerful window displays. Others were dark, their windows papered over, casualties of a changing world. I stepped off the bus, my backpack slung over my shoulder. The air was crisp and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was quiet, so much quieter than the city. The only sound were the chirping of birds and the distant hum of the bus as it pulled away, leaving me alone on the curb. I clutched the key in my pocket. It felt like an anchor in this strange, new place. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I looked across the square, and there it was, number 142. It was in the middle of the block, sandwiched between the cheerful bakery, from which the warm, delicious smell of baking bread was wafting, and a dusty, closed-down antique shop. Eleanor's Sweet Shop. The name was still visible, painted in elegant, looping letters of faded gold on the large picture window. But the window itself was covered from the inside with yellowing newspaper, and the entire storefront was boarded up with thick sheets of plywood, weathered to a silvery gray by years of sun and snow. The cheerful red and white striped awning above was tattered and faded, one side hanging down like a broken wing. It looked worse than abandoned. It looked forgotten. A tomb. My stomach sank. Mr. Gable was right. It was worthless. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it made my knees feel weak. This was a mistake. A stupid, childish fantasy. I should have taken the money. I should have called the developer and signed the papers and walked away. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, just staring at the boarded-up facade. People walked by, giving me curious glances. A woman walking her dog. A couple of teenagers on skateboards. In a town this small, a stranger with a backpack was an event. I felt exposed, vulnerable, a fraud. Just as I was about to turn around, to walk to the small diner I'd seen and use my last few dollars to buy a cup of coffee and a bus ticket back to the city, a man stepped out of the hardware store next door. He was old, with a kind, wrinkled face and a full head of white hair. He wore a dusty work apron over a flannel shirt. He saw me staring at the old soda fountain, and a slow, sad smile touched his lips. "Haven't seen anyone look at that old place in years," he said, his voice a gentle, gravelly rumble. "You family?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Her granddaughter, Maya." His eyes widened in recognition. "Eleanor's Maya? Goodness, child. I haven't seen you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. I'm George. I run the hardware store. Knew your grandma my whole life." He looked at the building, his expression clouded with memory. "It's a shame. What happened? This place used to be the heart of the town. Eleanor, she was the heart of the town." He looked back at me, his gaze sharp and knowing. "You here to sell it to those vultures from the city?" The question hung in the air between us. It was an accusation, but it felt like a test. I looked from his honest, open face to the boarded-up shop. My shop. My inheritance. My choice. I pulled the key from my pocket. Its brass surface glinted in the sunlight. "No," I said, the word feeling more true the moment I spoke it. "I'm here to open it." George's eyebrows shot up. A slow grin spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Well, I'll be," he said, letting out a low whistle. Eleanor always did like a surprise. He gestured with his head toward the door. "Well, go on then." First step's the hardest, he watched as I walked to the door, my boots echoing on the quiet sidewalk. The plywood sheets were secured with heavy-duty screws, but there was a smaller, man-sized panel cut into the main sheet covering the door, held in place by a simple hasp and a large, rusty padlock. It was clearly meant for access, but not for welcome. George must have seen the lock and a look on my face. "Hold on a minute, kid." He disappeared back into his hardware store and emerged a moment later with a massive pair of bolt cutters. He didn't say a word, just walked up, positioned the jaws of the cutter around the padlock shackle, and squeezed. With a loud, satisfying snap, the lock fell to the ground. He handed the bolt cutters back to me with a wink. On the house, I mumbled my thanks, my hands shaking slightly as I pulled the panel away. Behind it was the original wooden door, its red paint cracked and peeling. And in the center of the door, a keyhole. It was dark, filled with cobwebs and grime. It looked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. I took a deep breath, the smell of dust and decay hitting me even from the outside. I slid the tarnished brass key into the lock. It resisted at first, gritty with age, but then with a final push it slid all the way in. I turned it. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. I felt a fresh wave of despair. Of course it wouldn't work. Nothing was ever that easy. But then I turned it harder, putting all my weight into it, and there was a loud, protesting clunk from deep within the door. The lock had turned. I pulled the handle, and the heavy door groaned open on rusty hinges, revealing a slice of pure, unadulterated darkness within. The air that rolled out was thick and stale, a time capsule of scents. Dust, mouse droppings, something vaguely sweet and syrupy that had long since soured, and the faint, ghostly perfume of my grandmother's vanilla extract. I stood on the threshold, peering into the gloom. It was like staring into the mouth of a cave, into the past itself. Fear and excitement and a profound sense of grief all swirled together inside me. This was it. I was home, or at least I was at the beginning of whatever home was supposed to be. I took a step inside. The door swung shut behind me with a heavy, final thud, plunging me into near-total darkness. The only light came from the thin cracks around the boarded-up windows, casting dusty, ethereal beams through the gloom. My eyes slowly adjusted, and the shapes of the room began to emerge from the shadows like ghosts. It was all still here. A long, marble-topped counter ran the length of the room, lined with a row of round, red vinyl stools, their chrome bases pitted with rust. Behind the counter, the massive, mirrored back bar was clouded with a thick layer of grime, reflecting my own shadowy form back at me. The silver soda pulls, shaped like elegant swan necks, were tarnished and dull. Milkshake machines and glass jars for penny candy sat like silent, patient sentinels. Small, round tables and wire-backed chairs were scattered across the checkered black and white tile floor, all of it draped in a fuzzy blanket of gray dust. It was as if someone had just locked the door one afternoon and never come back. Tom had stopped. I ran my hand along the counter. The marble was cold and smooth beneath a layer of grit. I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the laughter of children, the clink of glasses, the friendly gossip of the town, the gentle, steady presence of my grandmother presiding over it all. A wave of sadness washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I had missed this. I had missed her, and I hadn't even realized how much until this very moment. I walked slowly through the room, my footsteps the only sound in the deep silence. I went behind the counter, my fingers tracing the outlines of the equipment. I found the old-fashioned cash register, a heavy, ornate brass thing. I pressed one of the keys, and with a surprisingly loud ka-ching, the drawer shot open. It was empty except for a single, shiny silver dollar. A 1958, the year my grandmother had opened the shop. I picked it up, its weight cool and solid in my hand. Her first dollar, or her last. A good luck charm she'd left behind. In the back, I found a small kitchen, even dustier and more chaotic than the front. Pots and pans hung from a rack, coated in cobwebs. A stack of petrified menus sat on a prep table, their pages warped by years of humidity. The walk-in refrigerator was a cavern of mold and decay, and I shut the door on it quickly, my stomach turning. Beside the kitchen was a tiny office, barely bigger than a closet. A small wooden desk was pushed against one wall, a rotary phone sitting on top of it like a museum piece. A calendar was still hanging on the wall, frozen on May, 15 years ago, the month she went into the hospital for the last time. Everything in the room was a testament to a life abruptly halted. But as I stood there, in the heart of this dusty, forgotten place, something else began to stir within me, pushing back against the grief. It was a flicker of something, a sense of purpose. This place wasn't dead. It was just sleeping. I went back out to the main room. The floor was solid under my feet. The structure of the building felt sound. The dust could be cleaned. The rust could be polished. The gloom could be banished with light. It was a monumental task, one I had absolutely no idea how to begin. I was overwhelmed. I was alone. I was scared. I sank onto one of the dusty counter stools, put my head in my hands, and for the first time since I'd left Mr. Gable's office, I cried. I cried for my grandmother. I cried for the childhood I'd lost. I cried for the anger and betrayal I felt toward my sisters. And I cried because I was so completely and utterly lost. After the tears subsided, leaving me feeling hollowed out and strangely calm, I just sat there in the silence. The dusty sunbeams shifted as the afternoon wore on. I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Under the counter, near the cash register, one of the black and white floor tiles was slightly raised, its corner sticking up just a fraction of an inch higher than the others. Curiosity piqued. I knelt and pried at it with my fingers. It was loose. With a little effort, it came up in my hand, and underneath, nestled in the dark, hollow space, was a small, metal lockbox. My heart started pounding again, a different rhythm this time. Not fear, but anticipation. I lifted the box out. It was heavy, made of dark green metal, with a simple latch on the front. It wasn't locked. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, was a thick stack of envelopes, tied together with a faded silk ribbon. And on top of the stack was a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it. It was a letter written in my grandmother's familiar, elegant hand. "My dearest Maya," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I am gone. And it means you are finally home." The word home seemed to leap off the page. I had to read it again. Home. She had called this dusty, derelict place my home. I untied the ribbon and picked up the first envelope. My name was on it, written in the same hand. The postmark was from 15 years ago. She had been writing to me. All this time, there had been letters waiting for me, here in the dark. I opened the first one, my hand shaking so badly I almost tore the delicate paper. The ink was slightly faded, but her words were clear, a voice reaching out to me across the years. "My dearest Maya," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well, though I know that is a foolish thing to hope. If you are reading this, then you are a woman grown, and I can only imagine the hardships you have faced to get here. I am so sorry I was not there to guide you through them. Please, you must believe that leaving you was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I had to stop and take a breath." The formal, almost stiff tone felt so different from the warm, laughing woman I vaguely remembered. This was the voice of someone carrying a heavy burden. I continued reading. "I'm writing this from my hospital bed. The doctors use long, complicated words, but the meaning is simple. I don't have much time. I have spent these last few days putting my affairs in order, and my greatest worry, my only real worry, is you." The words were a physical blow. All those years in the system, feeling like a piece of administrative baggage, a problem to be managed. I had felt so utterly alone, so certain that no one in the world was worrying about me. And all along, she had been. Her love was right here, written in ink on a page, waiting for me in the dark. Your sisters, Melissa and Tara, they are good people in their own way, but they are weak. They are afraid of things they don't understand. They are afraid of our family's past. And most of all, they are afraid of the responsibility you represent. When I am gone, they will try to do what is easiest. They will try to erase the difficult parts. They will try to erase you. A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. Erase me? It sounded so dramatic, but wasn't that exactly what they had done? They had taken my inheritance, my connection to this family, and tried to pay me off, to make me disappear. You see, Maya, There is something you don't know about your parents. Your father, he was not a good man. He got involved with very dangerous people before he died. He left behind a debt, not of money, but of favors and allegiances. A debt those people expected his family to pay. When your mother passed away, that responsibility fell to me. I have spent my life protecting you children from that shadow, keeping you safe in this small town, away from the city and the people your father knew. I used every penny I had, sold off everything of value, to keep them at bay. This soda fountain, this little piece of the world, was the only thing I managed to shield, the only thing I could truly call our own. I sat back on the dusty floor, the letter trembling in my hand. This was a story I had never heard. We had been told our father was a salesman who died in a car accident. A simple, clean tragedy. But this was something else entirely. A hidden history of danger and debt. It explains so much. The constant worry in my grandmother's eyes. Her reluctance to ever leave Havenwood. Her insistence on a quiet, simple life. It wasn't because she was old-fashioned. It was because she was hiding. She was protecting us. The second letter was dated a week later. Her handwriting was a little shakier. Melissa and Tara came to visit me today. They brought flowers that smell of the hospital, not of a garden. We spoke about the future, about you. They want to sell the house. They want to sell everything. They say it's for the best, to settle the debts. But I know it is because they want to cut all ties to this life, to the memory of their father. They want to pretend they came from somewhere else, from a simpler, cleaner story. They ask me about you. They see you as the last, messy loose end. They want to put you into the state system. They say it's for your own good, that you'll have professionals looking after you. They use all the right words, all the sensible, logical phrases. But I see the truth in their eyes. They are terrified, and they are willing to sacrifice you for their own peace of mind. The knot of anger in my stomach, the one that had been there since Mr. Gable's office, tightened until it was hard to breathe. It wasn't just negligence. It wasn't that they couldn't be bothered. It was a deliberate choice. They had thrown me away to protect their carefully constructed new lives. They had seen me as a liability, a connection to a past they wanted to bury. I was the ghost they were trying to exorcise. The box contained more than a dozen letters, a chronicle of my grandmother's last days, a testament to her desperate, losing battle to protect me. In each one, she laid out more of the truth. She explained that the trust she'd set up for the soda fountain was ironclad, created long before the debts, long before the sickness. It was my sanctuary, the one place no one could touch. This place, Maya, she wrote in the final letter, the ink blotchy and faint, is more than just a building. It is a legacy, not of money, but of independence, of community. It was my way of being my own woman, of building something good and sweet in a world that can be so bitter. It is your birthright. Don't let them take it from you. Don't let them convince you that a handful of silver is worth more than a foundation of your own. The money they offer you will be gone in a year. But this place, if you have the courage to bring it back to life, it will sustain you forever. At the very bottom of the box, beneath the last letter, was a stack of old leather-bound ledgers. I opened the top one. They were the soda fountain's financial records, kept in my grandmother's meticulous script. But tucked between the pages were thick wads of cash. $100 bills, 50s, 20s, all bundled in paper bands. I counted it. It was thousands of dollars, more than I had ever seen in my life. A final note was attached to the top bundle. For the taxes and for the pipes, which I'm sure have burst by now, and for a new awning. Start there. The rest will follow. Be brave, my darling girl. Your loving grandmother, Eleanor. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the truth, the money, and the ghost of my grandmother's love. The dust motes danced in the fading sunbeams, and for a moment, I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt her presence in the quiet, still air. The weight of it all was crushing. The betrayal from my sisters was a deep, raw wound. The story of my father was a terrifying new reality. And the task ahead, reviving this place, seemed impossible. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the entire story of your life is suddenly rewritten, where everything you thought was true turns out to be a lie designed to protect you, or to control you. It's a feeling of profound dislocation, like the ground beneath your feet has vanished. If you've ever been there, I want you to know that you're not alone. This community we're building here is for people who have had to find their own ground, who have had to build their own foundations. Take a moment, if this is hitting you, and just breathe, and maybe drop a comment below to let me know you're here. Your story matters. Now let's get back to what happened in that dusty, quiet room. I spent the night in the soda fountain. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I found a pile of old, clean aprons in a back closet and made a makeshift bed on the floor behind the counter. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old building, every scuttling sound in the walls sent a jolt of fear through me. But it was a different kind of fear than I was used to. It wasn't the fear of a stranger in the next bunk at the group home or the fear of a caseworker surprise visit. This was the fear of ownership, the fear of responsibility. It was my building creaking, my mice scuttling, my future hanging in the balance. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but with a new sense of resolve. My grandmother's last words echoed in my mind. Be brave. I used the money she'd left to pay the back taxes at the town hall, a transaction that earned me a surprised and respectful look from the town clerk. Then I went to the small grocery store and bought a bucket, sponges, a mop, and the strongest cleaning supplies I could find. And I started to work. For the first week, I just cleaned. It was a relentless, back-breaking job. I filled dozens of trash bags with old, spoiled inventory and garbage. I scrubbed the grime from the mirrors until they shone, reflecting a brighter, emptier version of a room. I washed every dish, every glass, every piece of silverware until my hands were raw. I mopped the checkered floor over and over, the black and white squares slowly emerging from beneath a decade of dirt. George from the hardware store became my first and most steadfast ally. He'd check on me every day, bringing me a hot coffee from the bakery next door and offering advice. He told me which plumber to call about the burst pipes my grandmother had predicted, and which electrician could be trusted to look at the ancient wiring. He told me stories about my grandmother, painting a picture of a woman who was tough and kind, a pillar of the community. She gave every kid in this town their first job. He told me one afternoon, leaning against the counter as I polished the chrome on the soda pulls. Taught them responsibility, taught them how to count back change, and how to look a customer in the eye. This place was more than a business. It was a school. Slowly, tentatively, the town started to notice. People would peek in the door, which I now left propped open to air the place out. They'd see me, covered in dust and sweat, and offer a word of encouragement. The woman from the bakery, a kind, bustling woman named Maria, started leaving me a bag of day-old pastries on the doorstep every morning. An old man who had been one of Eleanor's regulars offered to help me reglaze the cracked window panes. It was strange. For my entire life, I had been invisible, a case file, a problem. Here, I was a person. I was Eleanor's granddaughter. I was the girl who was bringing the sweet shop back. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a slick area code from a big city. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew who it was. Is this Maya? A smooth, professional voice asked. It was the developer, the one whose card I'd left on Mr. Gable's desk. My name is Mark from Crestview Development. I believe your lawyer mentioned our offer for the property at 142 Main Street. I know who you are, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Good. Then you know it's a very generous offer. We're prepared to close quickly. It's a simple transaction. Your sisters have already approved on their end. We just need your signature. His voice was so reasonable, so persuasive. He was offering me the easy way out, the clean break my sisters wanted from me. For a fleeting second, I was tempted. This work was so hard. The building needed so much. A new roof, new plumbing, new wiring. The money my grandmother had left was a good start, but it wouldn't be enough. The developer's check would solve all of that. But then I looked around the room. I looked at the sparkling mirrors and the clean floor and the gleaming soda pools. I thought of my grandmother's letters, her fierce, protective love. I thought of George's kindness and Maria's pastries. This place was already giving me something that money couldn't buy. The property is not for sale, I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I don't think you understand, miss. I understand perfectly. I interrupted, my voice gaining strength. I'm Eleanor's granddaughter, and I'm reopening her shop. So you can tell my sisters their plan didn't work?" I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking, but I was smiling. It was the first time in my life I had ever stood up for myself, the first time I had ever said no to the people who thought they could decide my future. It felt terrifying, and it felt wonderful. The call from my sister Melissa came an hour later. Her voice was shrill, laced with an indignation I knew was really just fear. "What do you think you're doing, Maya? We had a deal. The developer called us. He said you refused the offer. You can't do that." "I can," I said calmly. "It's my property." Grandma made sure of that. Grandma was a sentimental old fool. "That building is a liability. It's a wreck. We are trying to help you, to give you a fresh start. Why are you being so difficult?" I could hear Tara in the background, murmuring her agreement. They were a united front, as always. "You weren't trying to help me," I said, the words coming out cold and clear. "You were trying to get rid of me. You were trying to bury Dad's past, and I was the last piece of it you couldn't control." "I know, Melissa. I know everything." Silence. A thick, heavy silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. I had finally said it. The secret was out, laid bare between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was a strangled whisper. "You don't know what you're talking about. Grandma left me letters," I said. "She told me everything. About the debts. About the danger. About how you chose to throw me to the wolves to save yourselves." "It wasn't like that," she stammered, the panic evident in her voice. "We were protecting you. We were protecting ourselves. You have no idea what it was like living with that hanging over our heads. We just wanted a normal life." "And what about my life?" I asked, the question raw with years of pain. "Did you ever stop to think about me? About what it was like for me in those homes?" More silence. She didn't have an answer. She had never had an answer. "Don't contact me again," I said. "Don't call me. Don't try to help me. You gave up the right to be my sister a long time ago." I ended the call and blocked her number. Then I blocked Tara's. It was a brutal, painful act, like severing a limb. But it was also a liberation. I was finally, truly on my own. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a choice. The next few months were a blur of hard work. The money from the lockbox covered the essentials. The new plumbing, the updated wiring, and a patch for the leaky roof. I did most of the cosmetic work myself, learning as I went. I watched online tutorials on how to plaster walls and lay tile. George let me borrow tools from his store and patiently answered my endless questions. Maria taught me how to bake her famous cinnamon rolls, a recipe she said my grandmother had always coveted. The community rallied around me in small, meaningful ways. A retired painter helped me repaint the faded gold letters on the window. The high school football team helped me haul the heavy old booths out to be reupholstered by a woman down the street, who gave me a massive discount because Eleanor had once given her a job when she desperately needed one. Every person who helped had a story about my grandmother, another piece of the puzzle of her life. They were giving me back my history, one memory at a time. I discovered that home wasn't something you inherit in a will. It's something you build. You build it with drywall and fresh paint, with kindness and shared stories. You build it by showing up day after day and doing the work. You build it by accepting help when it's offered and by offering it in return. The soda fountain slowly transformed. The dust and decay gave way to light and color. I chose a soft, sunny yellow for the walls and had the red vinyl on the stools and booths replaced. I polished the marble counter until it gleamed. The space that had once felt like a tomb now felt bright and hopeful. It felt like a new beginning. As the reopening day approached, a new kind of fear set in. What if no one came? What if I had poured all of this time and energy, all of my hope, into a failure? What if the town had moved on and there was no place for an old-fashioned soda fountain anymore? I was standing behind the counter one evening, nervously arranging and rearranging the newly washed glasses when George came in. He saw the look on my face. "You're scared," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Good," he said with a smile. "Means you care. Your grandmother was scared on her opening day, too. She told me she was so nervous she almost dropped a whole tray of glasses." He looked around the beautifully restored shop, his eyes shining. "She will be so proud of you, Maya. You haven't just fixed her shop. You've honored her memory. You've brought the heart back to this town. His word were the reassurance I needed. He was right. It didn't matter if it was a wild success or a quiet little shop. What mattered was that I had done it. I had taken the broken pieces of my past and built something new. I had faced the ghosts of my family and chosen my own path. I had become the person my grandmother had hoped I would be. Brave. The night before the grand reopening, I stood outside on the sidewalk, looking at my shop. A brand new red and white striped awning was stretched taut above the sparkling clean window. Inside, the lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow. I had one last task. A local craftsman had repaired the old neon sign that had been in storage in the basement. It was a simple, elegant script that just said, Eleanor's. He had added a smaller line underneath, in the same style. It now read, Eleanor's and Maya's. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch. The sign flickered to life, bathing the quiet street in a soft, rosy glow. It was a beacon, a promise. It said, we are here, we are open, we are ready. Standing there in the cool night air, I finally understood what my grandmother had given me. It wasn't just a building or a business. It was a second chance, a chance to have a home, to build a community, to create a life of my own making. She had given me a foundation, and the rest was up to me. The story of our lives is so often written for us by other people, by our families, by our circumstances, by the systems we find ourselves in. But there comes a point where we have to pick up the pen ourselves. We have to decide which parts of the old story to keep and which parts to leave behind. We have to be brave enough to write a new chapter, even if we don't know how it's going to end. My journey is far from over. Reopening the shop was the beginning, not the end. There will be hard days and setbacks, I know that. But for the first time in my life, I feel equipped to face them. I have a home. I have a community. And I have the strength that comes from knowing I survived the worst and chose to build something better. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rewrite your own story, I want to invite you to join us. Subscribe to the channel and become a part of this community. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me about a time you chose the harder right over the easier wrong. What did you build? What did you learn? I'll be reading every single one, because every story of resilience, every story of rebuilding is a light in the darkness. Thank you for listening.